Hello, I'm Zach Hayes. I'm here at the Canadian Science Policy Conference 2015 in Ottawa. I'm joined by Brian Owens. Thanks for being here, Brian. Appreciate your time. Brian is the general science editor of Science Borealis, which is a science blog, as well as the editor of Research Professionals, which is a new research publication, and you do some freelance science journalism as well. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the work you do?
Well, I write about pretty much anything in science. Policy is one of my focuses. It's kind of where I started my career in the UK. I originally wrote for one of Research Professionals' publications over there called Research Fortnight, another one Research Europe, and I was news editor there for a while. Then I went to Nature for a couple of years before moving back to Canada and going freelance. So I now write about Canadian science policy and then just any sort of science or environment type story that comes my way.
Great. So you'll be monitoring a panel on science blogging later today, right?
Yes.
So what is the significance of blogging and other forms of social media for communicating and discussing science policy today?
Well, the idea for our panel is to kind of get an idea or get across an idea of how people can use blogs to communicate or to influence policy, to talk about policy in a more informal way. It's more open, so anyone can start a blog and have their opinion on policy out there, and it can actually be quite an effective way of influencing government policy or institution policy. I just ask the University of British Columbia that a blog basically ended up with the chair of their board of governors having to resign over academic freedom concerns. So that's maybe not the way universities would like to see blogs used to influence policy, but it shows you that there is a power of getting your own ideas out there,
right? And
people will take notice,
right? And how have you kind of noticed that transforming or changing throughout the past decade or the past few years? Has it been growing? How has the influence kind of been changing?
Yeah, I mean, blogging has been around for probably about 10 years or so, maybe a bit longer, and it certainly is becoming more and more important in things like policy. So in the United States, a lot of the policy conversation starts on blogs before it kind of filters its way up into Congress or into presidential elections and things like this.
Right.
I think it doesn't happen quite as often as Canada, but it's coming along as well. There were certainly some under the last government. There was a lot of bloggers or scientists or people involved in science policy who spent a lot of their time talking about the government policies. There was the Muzzled Scientist blog of one anonymous scientist inside the government talking about the difficulties in communicating his work. John Dupuy from the University of York has a very good blog that chronicled a lot of what became known as the war on science and is often talked about even now when discussing sort of the legacy of the last government. So it's certainly a growing area and it's becoming much more noticeable in Canada, I think.
Right. And how do other kind of social media applications kind of extend that influence? Like if there's a particularly interesting or even controversial blog post put up, how does that kind of disseminate throughout the community?
Well, social media is sort of the main way that these blogs get disseminated. So people will tweet about them or put them on Facebook, and it's actually shifted a lot of the conversation into sort of a broader social media discussion. So people tend to, there might be comments on the blog with people discussing it, but the conversation always gets much wider and it reaches, places around the world. People who are not necessarily closely related to what is being discussed might weigh in when they see it come across their Twitter feed or something like that.
Right. Okay, now you have experience, like science blogging experience, as well as experience with kind of, I guess, traditional research publications or writing. Is there a big difference between the type of writing, the styles of writing? Like, what are the
I mean, a blog is always going to be a bit more informal. It's often more of an opportunity to get an opinion across. So when I'm writing a news story, whether about policy or about anything else, it's you have to have that slight detached and an attempt at balance. Whereas a blog is almost always much more personal, which can be good and bad. They're a lot quicker. You don't spend a lot of time editing, although sometimes maybe you should. And that's the main difference is the informality. There's very little fact checking that goes on with blogs, for example.
And do you find that that kind of informal nature kind of lends itself to more conversation, fostering more conversation?
Yeah, I think people feel, as it comes across more conversational in the blog itself, people tend to get more, feel more welcomed into having a conversation about it. And often with blogs, you'll get, the writer of the blog will be responding and involved in the conversation, whereas a lot of the time, journalists don't necessarily answer a lot of the questions on social media that come up once they've written an article. They're on to their next one. They don't really have time for that kind of thing.
So Science Borealis, I saw was actually launched at CSPC 2013. So what's kind of changed with that particular blog since then?
Well, so Science Borealis isn't sort of a blog in itself. It's it's kind of a blog aggregator of anyone who has a blog in Canada about science or science policy, any kind of environment, anything like that, can be syndicated on the Science Borealis platform. And then it's kind of a central area where you can go and find lots of different blogs about Canadian science and science policy. And it's grown quite a bit in the past 2 years. So we launched it 2 years ago at CSPC. There's now, I think, more than 100 blogs syndicated on it. And we also have our own content that we create, so we'll have sort of curated posts from each of the sectors. So I cover general science along with a co-editor. So every couple of months we'll kind of give a review of what's been going on in our blog feed in our category, and we also have other groups will sometimes use our platform as a way of getting their own blogs out as well.
And how do you? You said there were over 100 blogs now syndicated. How do those blogs get connected to Science Borealis? Is there?
If you have a science blog in Canada and you want to be on Science Borealis, you just have to get in touch, send a link, and we can add you to our feeds.
Okay, great. So for you, what is the significance of, or I guess for the larger science blogging community, what is the significance of an event like the Canadian Science Policy Conference?
Well, it's a really good opportunity to reach audiences that might not know about us. The blogging world can be a bit insular. So for us, having a large audience and a much more diverse audience that might not be reading a lot of these science blogs, it's a very good chance to get our name out, show what we're doing, and just to be involved in the conversation around policy as well. We have a policy and politics section on the feeds as well, and to just let people know that there are all these policy blogs out there that they might not see, but they can be a good place to be finding ideas.
Great. And so what do you see for the future? You said there's been a lot of changes already in just the past decade or so that science blogging has kind of been in existence. What do you see as kind of some of the big changes that are coming down the pipeline for blogging? What does the future look like?
Well, I think it's just going to sort of spread more, and a lot of traditional media has already embraced blogs. It's hard pressed to find any magazine or newspaper that doesn't have a section that they refer to as their blog, which is generally used as a quicker, more informal way of getting news out. And I think that will just increase. I think some things that are just blogs will become known as more trusted news sources. Although that comes with the caveat that they often don't have the fact-checking and editing that a traditional media will have. But it's certainly, there's a lot of areas where people will go to a blog first now to get their news. Right. And I think that will only increase. And
do you think there's kind of a danger there that needs to be taken into account? That, for example, sometimes news stations will have a little ticker with things from Twitter or little headlines from blogs or what have you. Is there a danger there that because it's a little bit more relaxed on the fact-checking side, that things can kind of be taken and people can believe certain things without the proper due diligence?
Yeah, I think that's a worry. I mean, people have to know what they're getting when they're getting their information from blogs and social media, that it's not the same as getting it from the New York Times or from Nature. It just doesn't have the same rigor behind it. But it's, as long as people are aware of that and kind of know how to do some of their own fact-checking and don't rely exclusively on a sort of very opinionated blog to understand what is going on, then it's a very good supplementary source of information.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Brian, very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
So that again was Brian Owens, a freelance science journalist as well as an editor for Science Borealis and Research Professionals. Thank you again. We're here at the CSPC 2015 Science Policy Conference in Ottawa.